It is 11:59, 1 minute before we actually start our class today. And I'm glad that you have joined us. Throughout this week. We will focus on the topic of mental health. And with the topic, I hope that we're able to at least raise the awareness of individuals about how the COVID-19 pandemic has really impacted the escalation of anxiety, suicide, and depression in the minds and hearts of so many individuals. Uh, and because it is a pandemic, this is going to be across the board in every state, in every community. So as we look at today's lesson, we're going to study the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on suicide, anxiety, and depression. On yesterday, we put up the number for the suicide prevention hotline. And I want to share that information with you again today. 1-800-273-8255 or 1-800-273-TALK. Let me just reiterate, suicide is a serious public health problem that can have lasting harmful effects on individuals, on families, and communities. Suicide is more than a mental health concern. As we mentioned on yesterday, the Center for Disease Control showed that a range of factors contribute to suicide among those who are without known mental health conditions. In other words, in the midst of this pandemic we're in, people have committed suicide that historically, people would say there's nothing wrong. They've shown no indicators. They've not been depressed. They've not shown abnormal anxieties. But it seemed as if this COVID-19 pandemic had a negative and a lasting and sometimes a deadly impact on individuals. Uh, so today, let's continue our study with just some facts, some findings from the Center of Disease Control, and then we'll make some practical biblical applications that I think are relevant to uh, our time that we're living in today. The CDC found that 10.7% of Americans reported seriously contemplating suicide in the 30 days before the survey that was done in June. That's in contrast, and I highlighted this next statement. That's in contrast to the 4.3% who reported the same thing over the course of 2018. 10.7 currently compared to 4.3% in 2018. The percentages were far higher in certain populations, including ethnic and racial minorities and essential workers. Uh, why? Why is there such a challenge? Because what you'll find is in the minority groups with essential workers, many times they do not have the options that others have in terms of being exposed to the COVID-19 pandemic. The report surveyed 5,400 Americans. It also found that about a quarter had symptoms of anxiety, and about the same percentage had symptoms of depression. you'd better believe anxiety goes up when you've got to go out and work, when you've got to go out and travel. You have no choice. Uh, when we talk about first line responders, police, fire, EMTs, nurses, doctors, even our sanitation workers, restaurant workers, you're dealing with people who are considered essential, but that doesn't mean they are tickled to death about probability of exposure. So while we're out enjoying shopping, whether it's at the grocery store, the drugstore, or even going out and going to restaurants, many of the workers are concerned about their own safety and welfare. They don't really know when people are seated in a eating establishment. Does this person have the COVID vac- the COVID virus? So the people sitting there are glad, yes, I'm out eating and I don't have a mask on because I can't eat with a mask on. But then the server, on one hand, they're glad they're working, yes. But then on the other hand, their anxiety is up because they're struggling with, am I going to contract something from these people who are just so bent on their rights to go out and eat? When we talk about air traffic, people are saying, no, I've got to travel. But the flight attendants, yes, they're working, but their anxiety can be up because now they are worried about their own safety on a flight. So when you see that in essential employees, racial minorities, ethnic minorities, certain populations, their stress, their mental health is at risk because they're trying to serve the needs of citizens who feel, and sometimes justifiably, that they must have certain needs met. Let's look at this particular slide that deals with the elevated mental health and the toll that it has due to the COVID-19 stressors. This is from the JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, from a health forum that was conducted in August of 2020. Certain groups also show a disproportionately high risk for suicide ideation. Those who had seriously considered suicide in the past 30 days included respondents, and we talked about this yesterday, ages 18 to 24 years old, Hispanics, 18.6%. But then I bolded Blacks, 15.1% respondents. Individuals less than a high school education, 30%. 30%. That is extremely high. But I want you to begin to understand that just because individuals are out doing their work duties doesn't mean that there is not an elevation of stress that's going on inside the person. There's not an elevation of anxiety that the individual is dealing with. Uh, Essential workers, 21.7%. I bolded that because I want you to appreciate that many, many, many of what we call essential employees fall into that category. Hispanics, Blacks, lesser educated, essential workers. And their mental health is impacted. They may not say much about it because they've got to work. They've got to be out there among those that they are uncertain about their own mental health. I mean, about their own exposure to the coronavirus. But in the minority population, they're saying, but we have no choice. Yesterday afternoon, I set my garbage out on the curb because Tuesdays, uh, the regular trash is picked up and the recycle is picked up. Those workers are human beings, but you can be assured that when they pick up my trash today, if they pick it up because of the snow, but when they pick up your trash, my trash, they are concerned about their own safety. Only heaven knows when they open a trash bin, only heaven knows what's in that trash bin. It may be completely innocent, but in the mind of that sanitation worker, they are always dealing with, what am I exposing myself to? So their mental health is impacted. When we look at even our home deliveries, whether it's our mail service, whether during the Christmas holidays it was Amazon or FedEx or UPS, here's something we don't like to talk about, but it's true. The majority of those workers are not college graduates. You're talking about people with maybe a high school diploma or sometimes less, but they are providing a much needed service that cannot be rendered from working at home. But what we sometimes fail to appreciate is that they struggle with that, the choice between their own safety, their family's safety, and going out to provide a service, not so much because they want to provide the service, but because their livelihood depends on it. And one of the factors that is often overlooked is, how is this impacting that worker, that essential worker, that non-college grad, that Hispanic person, that Black person who basically have no choice except to be out there working. On Sunday mornings, most of the time, we'll stop by 7-Eleven on our way into church, and we'll treat ourselves to a decaf coffee. It was more exciting when it was $1 a cup, but it went back up. It's still okay, but it's nothing like $1. But don't you realize that those clerks inside 7-Eleven fall into this category of the lesser educated, the people who are out there exposing themselves to the public because they have no choice. They can't work from home. They can't afford to take a leave. But what we don't see when they greet us with a smile is, how is that impacting them mentally? How is it impacting their families emotionally? to know that their loved ones are being exposed day by day by day to strangers that are coming through the door. Some of them are wearing masks, some of them aren't. Some are just putting something over their face that doesn't even qualify as a mask. It's just something over their face. Handkerchiefs, bandanas, scarves. And the people at home, the family of the clerks in those stores, they're concerned about their loved ones. The clerks in the stores are concerned about their own welfare. But they're out there providing an essential service, but many of them fall into this criteria. And their mental health, according to JAMA, is really at risk. These same groups were disproportionately more likely to start or increase substance use to cope with the pandemic-related stress or emotions, including the respondents ages 18 to 24, Hispanics, and Black respondents, essential workers. What you're looking at from JAMA is these individuals had to figure out some way to cope with their escalated anxieties. Their families had to figure out some way to cope. And what many individuals found was increased substance use. That's probably not the best coping mechanism, but it's what they are familiar with or what they reverted to. It's not the right or the wrong of it. It's the facts of it. This is what is happening. Liquor sales have escalated. Cigarette sales have not dropped. The corner dealers' businesses have not suffered. And it's not to say these individual users are bad people. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's their way of coping with the stress. And we're getting the benefits of their exposure, but then we're shaking a finger at how they're coping. And if we could only walk a mile in their shoes for a minute, not to condone, but to understand. Under normal conditions, before this COVID-19 pandemic, this group of people, the 18 to 24-year-olds, weren't using substances at the rates they are now. But they weren't drinking at the rates they are now. That was true with the Hispanics. That was true with the Black respondents. That was true with the essential employees. But they're saying this is an abnormal environment we're exposed to, and we're just trying to get through it. They're not trying to justify this is right. They're just saying this is my way of coping. And what I hope we can learn to appreciate is to be more empathetic. There's a difference between being empathetic and condoning. But at least we could say we understand where you're coming from. I don't agree with how you're coping with this pandemic, but at least I have a clarity of what you're doing. I wish there was another way that you would handle it. I think I've got a better way, but I understand why you're doing what you're doing, although I don't condone the way you're doing it. During late June of 2020, 40% of the United States adults reported struggling with mental health or substance use. Look at this: anxiety and depression symptoms, 31%. 31%. Started or increased substance use, say 13%. Trauma stressors related disorder symptoms, 26%. And serious considerations of suicide because of this pandemic, 11%. What is the struggle that individuals are really wrestling with? It's the pain of where they are. The COVID-19 pandemic is causing internal turmoil inside of people. In the book of Luke, chapter 16, as we close out today's lesson, there is a story that I want to share with you. And it's an interesting story. It's not the story that we would think of as a comparative for what pain does. But in this story, in Luke 16, beginning at verse number 19, it's very well known about the rich man and Lazarus, remember? But I want you to pay close attention to the rich man's response to discomfort. That's really the point I want you to look at, is the rich man's response to discomfort. It's not debating where the discomfort comes from, how he finds himself in it, whose fault it is. I just want you to appreciate his response to the discomfort. Luke 16, beginning at verse number 19. There was a rich man, which was clothed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, full of sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus in his bosom. Now watch this verse. And he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy upon me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame. I'm not focusing on why, how, but I'm focusing on what was. He was in anguish. He was in complete discomfort because of the torment. so many times when people are dealing with trauma, anxiety, depression, they are in torment. We can fault 45 for his negligence, and he was negligent. We can say he had enablers around him, and he did have enablers who tried to ignore it. But that does not fix the torment. The torment is still there. So when we look at the impact of this COVID-19 pandemic on the mental health of people, we just have to embrace they are in pain. They're stressed out. They're anxious over this. They're uncertain. And no matter how they turn, they are still in discomfort. And what I pray we are able to do better is to address the mental, the emotional, the psychological, and yes, even the spiritual torment that people are experiencing because of this unexpected pandemic. Compound that with the daily stressors before the pandemic. And you can see how with many people it becomes overbearing. It calls upon each of us to be more patient with each other, to be more long-suffering toward each other, and to somehow comfort one another through this pandemic. Uh, Appreciate those first line responders. Appreciate the grocery clerk, the mailman, the mailwoman, the trash person, because not just appreciate them for the job they're doing, but appreciate what they're dealing with on the inside. Be empathetic toward them. Be understanding. This is challenging for you. Not that I appreciate you because you deliver my mail. Not that you're just ringing up my purchase. But while they are delivering and while they're ringing up, let's learn to appreciate the mental that they're going through and that their families are going through. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you for being patient and understanding and caring toward each of us when we are hurting, when others can't see what we're feeling. You know. And for those who are called upon in this season to continue to render services, to expose themselves to potential harm, you know what is going on inside of them. But help us to become more sensitive to the mental, to the emotional struggles they're experiencing. And help us to learn to encourage them more, to appreciate them, not just for the services they are providing, but for the risk, the mental risk, the emotional risk that they and their families are experiencing for our sake. Through Jesus, I pray.
Amen. Amen.
Uh, I'm going to stop, and if there are comments that you'd like to make, uh, the floor is open.
I have a question.
Okay.
With everything that happened at the Capitol,
Mhm.
is it possible that not only the political aspect, but the pandemic could have had impacts on those people so that they just needed a release? I mean, could the two be related?
I think they are.
Yeah, I would agree. And sometimes what happens in those settings, people don't realize how connected they really are. Uh, a lot of people who lashed out at the Capitol
Mm-hmm.
fit that criteria of just the lesser educated, a lot of blue collar people, and they were angry.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they kept talking about their rights were being taken away. Uh, and then people who had been accustomed to basically having everything their way were equally as frustrated and angry that they were losing power, more restricted in the middle of an election year, on the verge of losing more power. And what I mean by that is white America is no longer a majority race. It is knocking on the door heavily of becoming a minority population. And there's a sense of insecurity in that.
Right.
Uh, so all of those things collide. And what happens many times with mental health is people don't realize how all of that plays a role. And it stirs up things that was already there. Uh, in a way, I just heard a news report this morning about uh, the lady they call AOC. She disclosed yesterday that she had been sexually assaulted. But she disclosed that because of what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. She said it re-traumatized her. But she had not thought about that in the way that she currently did until that happened. She said it brought back all of those uncontrollable, helpless, I could do nothing to stop this. And all of that came back to her. So with her saying, no, this is insane, this is inappropriate, people will say, well, maybe some people are over responding. But when you've been traumatized mentally or emotionally, uh, it causes us to fight, to fight, and to fight to protect ourselves. Or it'll cause us to freeze. And if we freeze, we become the victim all over again. Or it causes us to flee. Let me get myself into a safe environment. And that's typically the three responses that we all have, is to fight, to flee, or to freeze. And what she was saying is, when I was sexually assaulted, I froze. I couldn't flee. If I had fought, I may not be here. Or maybe she did fight to no avail. But it causes a response in the present that people don't understand. Sunday night, I was watching Lifetime with Wendy Williams.
Yeah.
Not the movie, but just the interview.
Yeah.
And it turned out that a lot of her behaviors, I understood clear because of what she had been exposed to. Uh, but until we can take a step back and kind of say, okay, so where, what makes this person tick? Then we'll just constantly be saying shame on that person. Uh, but I agree with you 100% that there were some things that collided, but you had a person stirring that pot, and he knew exactly what he was doing. He stirred that pot, he watched it blow up, and then his response was, I don't know what happened. And with this COVID-19 pandemic, we can watch it, but if we watch it intelligently, biblically, and with the knowledge of how mental health work, then we can say, yeah, we know what's happening. We don't agree with it, but we know what's happening. And that's why with people and their behaviors, uh, I'm not complaining a lot because different people are going to handle this different ways. For people who choose not to come to church, I'm okay with that. With some of them, I don't agree with it because they go other places, but it's how they cope with it. It's just their coping strategy. Uh,
For me personally,
mhm,
the last statement you made, going to the doctor's appointments, taking my mother to the doctor's appointments. I mean, just for me personally, not trying to um, point a finger at anybody else, but that's my feeling.
mhm,
If I can go to these other places, then I can also come to church.
uh-huh. Yeah, I just got a question. Why do people think that a mask requirement is an infringement on their rights? It's because somebody stirred that pot. It, it's it's like if you get on an airplane, one of the last things that a flight attendant does before she or he takes their seat is walk through the entire fuselage and look down to see that you've got your seatbelt buckled. Is that an infringement? Well, it might be, but if you want to fly on that plane, you've got to wear your seatbelt. So for people to politicize this, it's ludicrous. And what's even more ludicrous is for the ignorance of people to be manipulated. That's the tragedy of it all. I read an article yesterday about Ben Carson saying that he had a real struggle with this COVID-19. It hit him hard, but you don't hear a lot about it. Well, I wonder why. He know he was made a fool of. He know that. He allowed the rubbing elbows with power to almost kill him. And now he'll go down in infamy. People won't remember him, especially from the majority African American community, as that neurosurgeon. We're going to remember him as the man that was in the Trump orbit that did some crazy, unexplainable things. I don't have the answer to all of this, but it's when people are distraught up here, they'll do funny things. We all will. If we don't step back and say, what in the world am I doing? Well, let's stop. But it's an interesting question. What is your take on it?
Ooh,
I just wonder if the riots at the Capitol was used by them as an excuse, to release some of that frustration. That are they really that connected to Trump, or did they just need, like you said, he stirred the pot? Did they just need an excuse to vent and to let some of these frustrations out? And then when I heard of different places where people actually went back home from that and committed suicide, it just seems that it wasn't all about just
No.
the assault on the Capitol.
I think this goes all the way back to the emancipation and this idea that the South is going to rise again. And people saw that as their moment, and they lost. And what happens in battle, a lot of people who are not victorious, Saul was the same way. When Saul was defeated in battle, what does he do? He tried to kill himself because of the shame, the arrogancy, that the very thing you went out to be victorious and overtake in, it defeated you. And now I've got to go back into the communities where I said, I'm going into DC and we're going to take over the country. And now I'm faced with humiliation and jail time. And so that anxiety and the depression sets in, and people sometimes, because of poor coping skills, they'll check out. For good or bad, because they've been traumatized. And some people handle it differently. Judas Iscariot is a textbook illustration. Judas thought he was going to be victorious in this. And when he found out or figured out he messed up, he checked out. So I agree with you. A lot of people who came to DC came with the idea that they were going to take over this government. And the shame and the humiliation, they had to go back. And now they're, any day the FBI can knock on their door. So they'll do ungodly things like kill themselves. But it's all centered back to this mental health and how people handle crises. Okay. Well, look, y'all have a good evening.
You too.
Okay. God bless.
All right.
You too. Have a good one.
Okay.
Bye, Fareed.
Bye. Bye.
bye.